No?
All right. Let's just go.
Okay.
All right. How's everybody doing? What's going on here?
Man, I'm so excited today. We've got Fowl back again. The Italian in charge of the world's largest, the largest space repetition experiment in history, the best experiment in history.
I was hoping you'd just leave it at Italian in charge.
Oh no.
All right.
Anyway, so yeah, I'll just introduce it a little bit. So, Fowl is in medical school in Italy, and he also uses SuperMemo a lot. And so they're taking this opportunity to do a study for his thesis on the effect of using SuperMemo for medical school and the outcome on grades and maybe some other parameters as well that I'll let him describe. But that's the crux of it, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, that is correct. And good evening to you guys.
Good evening, pal.
So what you said about the outcome, yeah, that's our main hypothesis. It's gonna be like a correlation, like how it correlates. We cannot prove causation. We cannot prove that SuperMemo definitely, beyond reasonable doubt, will grant you higher marks. The experiment itself it's really hard. Okay, it's really hard. Let me say it's really hard to do this kind of experiments because there's no real well-made literature. It's like still a very niche topic, and people were doing experiments, and I've talked to a few, even very smart people. They're not controlling the quality of all variables involved to such an extent that you could really use those data. Like right now, we have this hunch, that space repetition is better, but the research to this point is like that like it hints in that direction, but it's not really that good. And we're trying to bring something new to the table, like we have a protocol we made to create flashcards so we could have like coherence, like very coherent flashcards among all students who created flashcards, because here students are creating their own flashcards. We put down rules, frequently answered question. I basically wrote down 30 something pages of documentation on how to interact during the experiment and I wrote those pages during the experiment because I did write like 8 pages before, but there were many things that I couldn't have really foreseen. So I had to write this thing and like steer the direction in a way that it would be consistent. Like consistency is really hard to reach.
This part.
So what is the?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, James.
I was going to say this part in particular really interests me. It seems like one of the big differences between this research that you're doing now and research into sort of similar areas that has gone on in the past is that you've taken into account things like formulation. And so I'd like to delve a little deeper into this. So it's my understanding that you're running this experiment in the context of an anatomy class. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it seems like, at least from my perspective, I'm not a medical student, but when I see, the sorts of things that medical students are made to remember, it often strikes me as very sort of asemantic knowledge. For example, if you take a sentence like colorless green ideas sleep furiously, that sort of sentence is extremely
It's a great example.
That sort of sentence is extremely asemantic, right? Because it doesn't have necessarily any semantic relations.
Yeah, if you were to close the green word, you would just go to remember that word just by pure memory. There's no connection.
Right. There's no connection to anything else.
Yeah.
So it seems like if you take that sort of sentence and you look at some of the metabolic pathways and things like of that nature that you're made to remember in anatomy classes and in biochemistry sort of related classes, they sort of follow the same structure where they contain so many of these abbreviations and just letters placed next to each other that don't really have any special meaning to you. So how, under those sorts of conditions, how are you teaching people to formulate these flashcards so that they can be coherent and useful to them?
So I want to say, just for as an introduction, all medicine knowledge, even the more logic medicine knowledge, like from some parts of pharmacology, psychiatry, internal medicine, are still very asemantic, because all medicine knowledge is fundamentally empirical. You can't really make abstractions like in math or programming. The logic is, we know that this works like this because we tested it after an hypothesis and it worked. But we don't really know all the fundamentals that well. Like, you take aspirin and we don't really know that well. Or even if we know, in 10 years, it's very likely that new mechanisms of actions will pop out and we'll say, well, aspirin works like that, and we didn't really have any idea why. So, yeah, you always deal, the point was, you always deal with asemantic knowledge. There's really no connection between question and answer, or if there's, you have to make it up yourself with like mnemonics and stuff like that. So what I'm teaching, if our listeners are familiar with Anki decks, I would say that the average level is like slightly above the Anking decks, and I would say slightly above because the flashcards are made in a way that they have a sequence and a logic to them. It's not like random flashcards, like you're supposed to study flashcards in a certain way. Like, we made very small sections that doesn't matter if you're studying from a book, from your notes, or from just from the flashcards. The flashcards are basically a standalone thing that you can use either pairing it with your material, or even on their own. You could easily do that.
So did you take inspiration from the Woz article, the Peter Wozniak article about knowledge structuring? Like the atoms are based on economics, if that helps you remember.
No, not really.
Because he talks about sequencing the items, and I was just curious if that was your approach.
Oh, I think that like this thing about sequencing the items is something I did take after Piotr articles. Not that one in particular. It's more like even in the 20 rules, you know, like when you see the examples, they do have a logic behind them. It's not like they're random. Right. And that's a thing that they don't do. Like, that's another thing. Like, that introduces a huge bias in your experiment, because if you're, I don't know, it's the same of giving someone a pill and not telling them, well, you actually have to swallow the pills, not keep it in your pocket. Like, how can you control the variables of your experiment if you don't even know, like, how you administer the treatment? So you do need formulation. Like, people have skipping out on this part for some reason, and really, like, boggles my mind why. Like, why would you do that? Like, it's man, it's such a huge problem, and that's why research is not reliable. That's why I will say that, and even our research, that's the thing. I don't think that our research is that high quality, but compared to the rest of the research, it certainly is. But on an absolute level, I don't really. The thing is, SuperMemo was not made for school, you know? Like, right now, there's not one tool that's really made for school. Not even Anki, Remnote, Rome, and all of that, because you need some collaborative features that are not there yet in any of the softwares. So that's the fundamental problem of the experiment, the software. Like, we don't have a good a software good enough, because SuperMemo, the website, is a little bit clunky. It's made more for language learning, you know. It's not made for for learning medicine, but we still had to use that because it was the best option. And
So I have a couple questions.
sure.
First of all, I think it's funny that Ebbinghaus started with these nonsense syllables, and everybody has just sort of continued it. They're claiming that this stuff is no longer nonsense syllables. But when you take people out of things they care about and you force them to learn painting or learn how to identify artworks when they know nothing about art and they don't care about art, to me it's roughly equivalent as nonsense syllables. I mean, of course, it's more semantic. There is meaning to it, and it is connected in some way, and it makes sense in some way. But still, it's not quite replicating what you would hope would be the reality, which is people learn things they care about, learn things they understand, and therefore they get the added memory benefit of coherence and semantics. But anyway, that's just one point. Oh, you have something to say, Jim?
Oh, yeah, I want to say I completely agree with that point, and it makes sense why they did that, because they want to control the influence of prior knowledge on, whether it's going to make it easier or more difficult to assimilate new knowledge. So you have to control for that in a sort of laboratory style experiment. But the issue is, of course, that the interaction between the prior knowledge and the future knowledge is exactly what we want to know more about, because we want to be using spatial repetition for exactly that purpose. So using these sorts of laboratory style experiments, I think, presents some issues.
No, I think it's just impossible. Like it's the interactions are too many. You can't really test as you do in psychology, at least. In psychology, you isolate something to the smallest level, and then you test that. But doing that with spatial repetition, in my not so educated opinion, because I'm not that educated on the matter, I don't know compared to Womb, but I don't consider myself that educated. It's dumb. There are so many factors, so many variables that interact with each other, that either you have a treatment in the real world, or it's not really, you can't really use the data you get.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm not educated on the field of psychology very well either, but my understanding is that they have a replication problem because of the way that these experiments are done. There are so many variables that it's so hard to control for everything. And that results in these replication problems, a few years down the line or a decade or whatever it is. But anyway, I have a couple other questions.
Oh, wait, there was something that James said I wanted to address about the interaction of knowledge. So I think that thing, like, we're not even close to understand the scope, the effect of that. Like, it's going to be years before someone builds a reliable enough experiment with the reliable enough tools that we can know something, not even all, something about how our knowledge seems to interact with each other.
Yeah, James, I think you tweeted something about this, about how the algorithm isn't worth optimizing anymore. But I still think there's a lot of room to optimize when you know that the information is related. Because sometimes intervals can last for years and years, or reviewing something implies that you reviewed another thing. You know what I mean? So you can increase the interval some amount, maybe not as much as a regular repetition, but some amount. And I think you could overall reduce the repetition load by a lot and avoid a lot of unnecessary reps. But anyway, that's just a side point, and I definitely agree there's a lot more to explore there. But what I was going to ask was, do you think that the amount of stuff you're required to learn in med school, even if it were semantic, would still be insane?
Yes. I mean, you can quantify that. It's not even an opinion anymore. Like, we created 23,000 flashcards. Okay? So we followed a very precise protocol that I may have someone translated in the future, so people in English, because it's all in Italian, that's the but people can see how we created them, and they are very atomic, like even lists. Like, we treated lists, so you have a bunch of lists, okay? So if a list was under 4 elements, you would just close each entry of the list and then the entire list. So the student could like repeat the entire list. And if it was bigger than that, you would split the list into two different parts, use some mean of association, some, I don't know, even alphabetical order or something to make out the two distinct parts, and then make basically two far apart lists. And so everything is very, very atomic. And when you make everything very, very atomic, the number of flashcards, like, it's insane. But the thing is, less than that, and you're missing out on details. Like this exam, they really, really, this is the hardest exam in my faculty, okay? But it's not the biggest. That's the thing. It's not the biggest one. There are exams that are even like larger than anatomy. And this is, by the way, is one of 2 parts of anatomy. This is 23,000 flashcards on part 2 of the anatomy exam. Okay, and part 1 is even more mnemonic than part 2. Because part 1 is like muscles, vessels, like peripheral nerves, so you have to remember all the branches and stuff like that, whereas the second part is more central nervous system and organs. But it's still insane. So imagine you have 4 exams or 3 exams, I don't remember, they change every year, but let's say you have 70 to 90, let's say 70,000 flashcards for one semester. Like, how many flashcards a day is that? Like what are we talking? Like 500 at least?
Dude, that is terrible.
Like the session that, like, your exam session starts in June here, and you can even take exams in September. So you have from March to September. How much is that? 6 months. So,
dude, that is insane.
Okay, so it is impossible. Like it's absolutely it's just ridiculous. Like it's doing no one good. Because the professor...
Especially because most doctors don't remember this stuff. They don't know this stuff offhand years later.
I wouldn't say most doctors. I would say every doctor. How can you remember that stuff? Like, you will remember something. I do remember something in general concepts for sure. But the thing is, you forget both, like, meaningless details and important ones.
Right. So you mentioned that there's another exam that's bigger, but the anatomy one is still harder. Is that because of the arbitrariness of it?
I think I would say it's because of the professors, like how the exam is structured. So there's probably more than one exam that's actually larger as far as material go. But there is, for example, the exam of pathology here, which is composed of 6 parts. Okay, so you have actually 6 exams to take in 3 different days to pass the entire exam. Whereas anatomy is more like one block, even if you have like 5 professors like making up the questions. It's weird. It's really weird. It's really, really weird. But how that's another thing. How the professor will grade the exam, an eventual oral exam, because sometimes it's oral, since the COVID made a trick on everyone's life. So they have it to do on Zoom. So it's even worse in my opinion, because it's like, okay. Anyway, it's just too much. It's just too much.
So can you give like a rough outline of how the study will work and the timeline and that kind of thing?
Sure. So we built the study with 2 advisors, who are Professor Zanotti from Padova and Professor Nadolny from Canada. They're the 2 main experienced, like, top brass in the experiment. And we recruited on a voluntary participation, so we didn't randomize for obvious ethical concerns, because otherwise it would be like, well, you gave this man a treatment who got him a better grade and whatever, so couldn't randomize. We have 180 3 students right now participating to the experiment, and during the first part, it was lasted around 15 to 18 days. They made the flashcards. I was revising all the flashcards and acting as a protocol enforcer, basically, and protocol corrector.
Just hold on a minute. Just pause there. Understand what this man just said. In 15 to 18 days, they made, what did you say, 23,000 flashcards? And you reviewed all of them? Oh.
Some of them multiple
I'm so
times,
sorry for
sadly.
you, my friend.
It's been a very alienating
anyway,
experience doing that. It wasn't
Go ahead,
fun.
sorry to
It
interrupt.
wasn't fun. Sure, no
I
worry.
can imagine.
So that was the first part. In the meanwhile, we mainly Alexis, the French guy, did the math for the experiment, while I created mainly the protocol part. And after that, now they're studying, and they will, in Italy, you have multiple exam sessions. You don't fail semesters. You fail exams, but even if you fail the exam, you can retake the exam whenever you want in certain dates. So, for example, they will have 2 dates, one in June, one in July, and then 2 dates in September. And we're covering those 4 dates. We could have covered, for example, December and next, what would it be? February, I think. Another 2 dates, but we decided to cut it to September to avoid like weird biases and stuff. So we just cover the, let's say, regular session. Okay.
Right.
And then we're gonna compare both how the students in the non Super Mama group did compared to the Super Mama group, and even among the Super Mama group, how people who used Super Mama like consistently did compared to people who didn't use Super Mama consistently. And let me say one thing. Like, this is what I think I really want to say about this experiment. The main problem that I found while, interacting with all these people, because I had to manage almost 200 people, and in the starting phase even more, because even people not participating had to gather data, forms, and blah, blah, blah. People are very uncooperative between each other. Like, they were mostly polite, and I'm saying mostly, okay? Mostly polite toward me. And when they were not, I could easily handle the situation. But when you ask these people to collaborate between themselves, that's where like the problems arise. And it made me really sad to see that another problem that we kind of created for ourselves is that we're not collaborating. Okay, like you now know how much material, at least in terms of flashcards, medicine really is. So like it gives you an idea, like 70, let's say 70, 60 to 80 range of error for semester. So more than 100,000 flashcards a year. And these people do not understand the value of cooperation. I told them, like, from day one, guys, the most important thing is that you learn how to cooperate. Like, this is not a single sprint. You're manning a boat, a huge boat all together, and you don't really want to leave people behind just because you need those people to man the boat. Even right now, there is one guy who took upon himself to modify, correct, and everything, all the flashcards that are wrong when they are like reported. So this guy is doing a tremendous work, but it's really, really tedious work. It's really not enjoyable work. But if he didn't step up, that would have been a major problem. And he's doing everything by himself, basically. Okay? So you have these people who do not like, if you're a med student right now, I would just want to put out the disclaimer, the most smart thing you can do to further your career is to talk to people. Get your own mates. Like, this is a war that will last 5 to 15 years, whatever. And and to fight this war, the more people you have on your side, the better you will fare. And if someone is lagging behind, don't sprint, wait for him, because at some point it will wait for you. And be kind.
No man left behind.
Yeah, and also be kind to people. Like, these people were really ruthless among each other at some point. I was like, dude, like, I am supposed to be the rude one since I'm 1 and you're like 200. And like, we need compassion in university, at least among students. You can't ask them out of professors just because, but at least among students, I would really have liked to see more cooperation and compassion and kindness. And there wasn't enough, sadly. There wasn't nearly enough. And that's one of the main problems. To make all these flashcards, to make all the material in active recall, like to package it in an active recall wrap, you need a lot of people. And a lot of people who collaborate, who talk to each other, and were on the same page. And many of these people weren't on the same page.
I wonder if there's anything sort of disincentivizing people from collaborating with each other. And I think I must have asked you this last time, but are people graded on a curve such that if someone else does well, they might do worse? Oh, so it's not
not that I know of, not on this exam at least.
Okay. So that's interesting. So then perhaps the reason people don't collaborate is because they can just free ride off the work of other people. So, maybe it's still rational for them to sort of not do any work and just benefit from the other people who are making flashcards. I wonder if there's a way to sort of prevent that. Because it sounds like a huge problem.
Beat their parents. I think it's like, it's more of a cultural problem than a like selfish individualistic problem. It's like, these people were raised like this. They didn't come out of the womb like pieces of shit, Like, you're raised to be a piece of shit. Like, if your father or mother doesn't teach you how to cooperate and how to live in a social setting, and listen, I had absurd situations, okay? Like, people getting really angry with me because I told them, listen, like, your flashcards are really bad. Like, if you don't do something, I'll have to have you redo it. Like, hey, I can't accept those flashcards, man. It's like 200 flashcards and they all suck. And they got like enraged. First of all, they spoke to me as if they were doing a favor to me, by doing these flashcards.
Right.
Which I found like very infuriating, because it's kind of the other way around, honestly. Like, people pay me to do that, to teach them how to do space repetition and to tutor them. And then when I told them, listen, it's not for me, it's for you and your colleagues, classmates, call it whatever you want. You have to think in like group logic. I can't accept these flashcards not to slight you, but because people will suffer like on a learning level if these flashcards enter the shared knowledge base. And people just got so angry with me. They took it so personally. And I was like, dude, Jesus Christ. Like, these people are 20 years old. Good God. You're not children. You're not a kindergarten. Man.
So, do you think there's anything that can be done to facilitate this sort of large-scale collaboration between college students? Or is it hopeless?
No, I do think that, like, first of all, like, if they see the benefits, like, they're not stupid, okay? Like, if they see the benefits of it, maybe they're not going to do top job, but they're still going to do their job, which is more than enough on these levels. Then you have, like, few outstanding individuals who will make up for the lost distance of these people. But as long as you have someone who's promoting the right culture at the top, and that's the thing, this kind of change has to come from who's in charge of the experiment. It can't come from it will not come from the students, unless among the students someone will rise like above the others and say, well, guys, we really, really need to cooperate, because, making our lives miserable among us is not really the smartest choice. So we better start collaborating. And
Well, I wonder if. Oh, go ahead.
no. Please ask. It wasn't.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wonder if it has to do with competitiveness, because, like, I've never been in the military, but I'm gonna presume that they aren't trying to be better soldiers than each other.
Mm-mm.
Like, there's a camaraderie there. They don't care who does the right thing. They're doing it as a group. I assume that's the way it's viewed. But in med school, or even just college, or even high school, I imagine, there's probably some level of competitiveness. Like, I remember reading on Reddit one time, this guy had a story about someone in college he knew who kept getting the best score on every test.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked to this guy, and he asked him, how are you doing this? How are you, getting such good scores all the time? And he said the whole time he was studying, he would think about steamrolling everybody else. He just wanted to know that he did better than everybody else in the class. And so that would fuel him, and he could just study all day long because he was so motivated by the idea of just steamrolling everybody else that he was able to study for a longer time. And I think that must be related to it, right? Like, when you're in med school, you want to do better than other people.
Like, I thought of that, and I do believe that there are individuals like that, but if you look at the actual people in medicine, I don't know, like, most of them are just children. They're not. Some of them are petty, okay? Like, people like that, the one you're describing, are mostly petty, with, like, this egomaniac dark triad complex. Dark triad, like narcissism and all of that.
Right.
Who wants to prevail on others on all levels. I just think that no one is teaching us how to interact with other people. I just think that, honestly, that's the main problem. I wouldn't say that med students, maybe, or very likely, they are more competitive on average than, I don't know, waiters, or military or whatever. But the main problem is that no one is teaching them, like, dude, like, step up if someone is having problems. And once I told them that, like, there were more than 30 to 40 people who actually stepped up. But at first I kind of had to threaten them. Like, they had to understand the stakes. I told them, listen, I need people to do this job, like reorganizing the sections and everything, because otherwise you cannot use the material. And that's when like, people start taking conscience, like, when they see what they're losing. And because I'm not saying that, like, no one, like, is Jesus from Nazareth, like, just waiting to give himself or herself to the group. It's not like that.
Right.
But people have to understand that it's not the Christian choice. It's not like the good choice to help others just because, but you help others because you get better results. Like, if you are fighting for yourself, at some point in your life, you will be very miserable or make people around you very miserable. And either case, it's very bad. So, sorry, James, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sure. I think this is one of the things I really dislike about the university system, is that it constrains the number of sort of optimal strategies for gaining knowledge to just one. You're always going to be a lone wolf at the end of the day taking the exam. So, in nature, you do have species, for example, that take a lone wolf strategy, right? There must be some species out there, for example, in nature, where the goal is survival. They'll take a lone wolf strategy and just fight by themselves. Actually, maybe that's not true, because I guess you do have to. I don't know if that's true, actually. I'll check that later. But for example, in nature, you have many different strategies, many sorts of different types of relationships between animals to overcome the goal of survival, right? Lots of different kinds of symbiosis between even different species and stuff like that. In the university system, there's just one. You're a lone wolf at the end of the day taking this exam, and that sort of environment is very constraining. It's like you've constrained the number of possible ecological niches for some people to fit in and create new things. And I don't know, it's so damaging.
It reminds me of, dude, have you ever seen that clip of those African wild dogs taking down, I forget what animal it was, but dude, they work together so well. I don't know how the coordination aspect of it is built into their behavior, but they coordinate really well and force these animals into spots where they can't recover from, force them to a body of water so they have nowhere to go, and then you just attack them as a group.
Exactly.
And it's just so true to say that I hope you're not working together to kill people. But it is true to say that when you work together with people and when you do your best to help, there's almost never a bad thing from that. Obviously, there's a degree of pathology there if you do it too much, to where you're not looking out for yourself as well. But nothing bad has ever happened to me as a result of trying to help someone else.
A big problem that was coming to my mind right now. I'm going to say something that is going to sound a little bit controversial, okay?
Okay.
Oh boy, never heard this before.
Hot take from Fowl.
You can edit it out. No. The hierarchies inside of the university are not based among students on competence. And there are virtually no real hierarchies. Like, in every real world context, you don't have a mass of, like, pressed together people in the lowest rings of society, and that's it. That's not how it works. Like, society naturally organizes itself with, like, people who are best at something raising above the ranks. What happens is that in the school system, you kind of kill this natural mechanism, and you kill it in two ways. One is obviously you do not facilitate it, so there is no getting into a position where you have any real sway on your fellow students, because again, I could take real choices for them, okay, and I had to during the experiment because I had to enforce the protocol. Otherwise, I could have made a study on how they are not following protocol. And another thing is, we tell people every single day, like, you're all the same, you're all have the same value, and we keep lying to people and making this huge damage to young men and women, saying, well, you're all equal, so, like, just get yourself in a room and you all speak, everyone speaks at the same time. Like, you will never find that in a work environment. Like, anyone who has been out in the real world, if you enter in a business, in a company, and get into a meeting and start talking above someone else who's more competent than you get kicked out. And that's enforced on many levels. Whereas at the university, I don't know, you're all students, you're all losers, and that's it. And
I think it comes back to sort of like it's by creating this fake environment where the stakes are quite low. Like in the business environment, if it turns out that it's just everyone who doesn't know anything is speaking, the business is going to fail. Everyone's going to lose their jobs. So the stakes are really high. But in the university system, you create this environment where people can do crazy things and say stupid things. And in some cases, that is good, because sometimes you do want to protect people in a university from, like, economic forces or needing to fight for their survival.
Like, do you really?
Perhaps, yeah. Like,
I think so, definitely.
Yeah, for example, if you have some sort of really kind of risky long-term idea that you need to develop over time that might not be immediately economically viable, you might need to provide, excess funds. You wouldn't want them just immediately to go bankrupt, that sort of thing. But it does seem like now more and more what you're seeing is it just being squandered on the most inane, stupid sort of ideas, things that could never benefit in reality. I think the difference is between sort of the ideas that do deserve to be protected and the ones that don't, is that the ones that do deserve to be protected do have some perhaps really beneficial payoff in the future. Something like DARPA that created the internet, created tens and trillions of dollars off of only like 100 million over 10 years or something like that. Something insane like that. The difference is just that the ideas that we're now protecting are just crazy, and the sort of patterns that you were talking about, like not having that natural hierarchy, crushing it down so that everyone's flat and considered to be equal. That is another thing that becomes enforced in this very strange sort of environment.
But didn't all like big discoveries and inventions like maybe started in the university, but like people just jumped off, right? As like soon as they actually got something working. Like I think of Facebook, Google, Microsoft. I don't know. People seems to run.
Oh, I thought you were talking about like scientific discoveries.
Well, I mean, isn't Google a scientific discovery?
I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily class it that way. I guess there's a frame in which you could call it a scientific discovery. But also, I'll just say, the last thing I want to do is make the world more like a business meeting. The number of times, the number of times that I've been in a meeting, and I've told you guys some of these stories privately, and somebody who does not know what they are talking about tries to say something as if they are an expert. It's just absurd stuff. It's absurd stuff. Like, I think I told you guys this one time. I was making a website, and there was this new guy who was in the meeting with us, and the boss of the company really liked this guy and whatever. And at one point, this guy's built websites before. At one point, he asks me, "So is this HTML?" And I didn't understand how to answer the question, because if you know anything about websites, you know that the end result of everything is HTML. The browser renders HTML, so there's nothing else you could do. And it's that's the type of thing I hear in meetings.
You coding some slick HTML there, huh, Paul? Show me your HTML stack right there.
So please don't make the rest of the world like business meetings.
I don't know. I think... See, I'm in a privileged position. Like, when I have business meetings with my startup, I can shush whoever I want. So if I'm hearing like bullshit, I'll just be quiet. I don't care. Like let's move on something that actually matters.
We tried to do that once. We were out to lunch and we had a meeting after the lunch. Mm-hmm. And I like cheesecake. And so we were talking and we had agreed that if the guy wasn't good that we were talking to, I would say the word cheesecake in conversation. And then we would try to usher this guy out. And so I say, I realize, oh my God, this guy sucks. He's awful. And so at some point I say, oh, did you remember to put the cheesecake in the fridge? Because there was a refrigerator in the meeting room. And then I look at the other people and I'm waiting for them to get on the same page as me. And it just did not happen. It just did not happen, dude. I was so let down by it. Oh, man. Anyway, I just want to say, you come to this podcast expecting to hear about an experiment, and you leave with a life lesson about doing things for other people. So that's what you get. That's what you get when you listen to this Golden Nuggets podcast.
Exactly. You cannot predict the kind of nuggets that you'll get from this podcast.
All right. On that note, I think we'll end it here. Sound good?
Beautiful.
Sure.
All right. Thanks for listening. See ya.
See you next time.
See ya.